Hey Lana, this is Rob. I'm about halfway through your book this month, Sword Catcher, and just wanted to talk to you a bit about how the book was going so far. I know Cassandra Clare is one of your favorite writers, so I really wanted to give this book my all and try to understand the kinds of books that you enjoy. And this book has been kind of a mixed reception for me. I guess initially I was actually really excited by the book as it got started because it really has this lived in world. The world building so far has been actually really, really great. So, what I really like about this setting is that it kind of feels like the aftermath of Rome. You know, in the stereotype of that, you would have people during the Middle Ages or the early Renaissance looking back at the things that Rome had created, like the roads and the aqueducts and the Colosseum. And in our stereotype, they would have no idea how those things were done, but it was really cool and it's held up for hundreds or thousands of years, and people are really impressed by it. Now, reality wasn't quite that, but popular culture has really held on to that idea, and it's a fun trope to have like in a fantasy novel. And I like that here because in the setting, like there used to be this old time, this almost mythological type time when there was high magic and dragons and phoenix and all these fantastical creatures, and then there was something that was called the Sundering. Now, not sure exactly what the Sundering was. All that we really know is that magic ceased to exist, and all the fantastical creatures are all now gone. I'm curious about how the Sundering happened. That hasn't been explained yet. But was it kind of like the Forgotten Realms, where like the world was divided between magic and not magic, perhaps? Forgotten Realms was different, but I'm just trying to link it to this story. Or was it maybe like Earth Dawn and Shadowrun, where there was a period of time of magic and then magic stopped working for a period of time, and then maybe it will restart again at a later era. Maybe it's kind of like that. You know, no idea, but I'm really curious about how this went. But either way, so the Sundering occurred and then an empire rose. And this is the kind of Roman Empire type of feeling. You get this massive empire, and at some point it collapses into many different city-states and small nations. And this is the part where I said the world building really feels alive and real, because unlike a lot of the books we've been reading lately, which only had the protagonist's country and the enemy country, and as far as the world is really concerned, that's about it. There might be other stuff out there, but it doesn't show up on any maps. It in no way applies to the story. Whereas in this world, there is dozens of countries and places that are constantly being listed in this. Some of which are heirs of the empire, like the city-state that this takes place in, which is called Castellane. And then like one of their neighbors, Sarth, is also one of these kind of heirs of the empire. But there's also faraway places, and that are pertinent to the story insofar as the story takes place in a merchant port city. It seems like it's more of a city-state than a country, and so it's constant, but it's a port, major port, so it's constantly sending out trade caravans and ships to bring back in trade goods. In fact, the nobility's even divided up this, this trade empire, and this noble's responsible for silks, and this noble's responsible for horses, this noble's responsible for wood, and so forth. And it's kind of this mercantile trading empire. Kind of actually feels a lot more like Renaissance Venice. Though the book seems to imply that this is more based on southern France, so maybe a Monaco type of story. So as I said, I'm actually really pleased and happy with the world building that's happening in this book. It feels like a vast impressive world that has a lot of flavor. They're constantly mentioning like, oh, these are Americanned noodles, or and so forth, and they bring up all these different places for where all these goods came from, and I and but no one really talks about it in an unrealistic way, because to the point of view characters, this is old information, and I like that for the most part, except for it's kind of at a certain level, it's just becoming technobabble. I mean, it's nonsense words at this point, because it's hard to keep track of where all these countries are, and there's no map that actually shows the countries. The map is just the city, Castellane. So I have no idea how far away stuff is. Am I maybe just projecting like my own biases onto like, oh, that sounds like a city in modern China, therefore that must be the Chinese place. No, I don't really want to do that. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is I actually really like that world building, except for because even some of the goods are using borrowed language words to describe whatever the item is, like a certain type of alcohol, perhaps. And because these borrowed words from other languages are being used, it even more just feels off, like it's hard to describe. So that's what I really mean about the technobabble. I don't really understand what the words are meaning at this point. There's no glossary or map to really refer to. So I'm struggling a little bit with, it's just throwing a lot of words at me that for the most part are flavor text. And that's good, but I think there would actually be a little bit of benefit if there was almost an audience surrogate character who could ask these questions on our behalf, because the main characters, they speak multiple languages, they're well versed in the world, and they're well educated. Both of them are actually very well educated, so to them, when these things happen, or when they're interacting with foreign countries or that kind of stuff, they don't internal monologue, oh, these are the people that are really well known for this, because there's no need to. And sometimes, like I said, I think that's a good idea, and sometimes I kind of wish it would be explained a little bit more. So I'm a bit mixed on my feelings during this first half of the book, because it has a lot of the things I love and want in a fantasy novel. It's just the execution, I'm just not loving it. But I like that it's there, and I want it to continue, and I'm hoping that maybe as the story progresses, I'll even more get into it. So the main story is taking place with two point of view characters. One is this sword catcher, and that's essentially a body double for the Prince of Castellane. And so it's his job to basically put himself in harm's way whenever there might be a threat to the prince. And the nation basically selected him from an orphanage as a child, brought him in, and has been training him and educating him and making him fully prepared. At any moment, he can just step in to the prince's place at major events. So he can speak like the prince, act like the prince, and all of that's, makes a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of world leaders do this today. I mean, realistically, mostly the bad ones. But, world leaders and celebrities use body doubles all the time for safety and security reasons. So it's a pretty fun concept. And the other point of view character is a doctor or a physician from an outsider community that's kind of an enclave inside Castellane. Now, this enclave outsider community, like I said, they live in a walled enclave inside the city where they have to always be inside the walls at night, and the normal citizens of the city are never allowed inside the enclave. And it gives them this feeling of being outsiders. They're not really part of everything, but the reason why they're tolerated and accepted in the society is because they're the only people that have a semblance of magic left. And I actually kind of really like the magic that's been brought up so far, because the magic they said that the high magic, the big magic, the world-shaping magic is gone. That's disappeared during the Sundering. But what's left is the lesser magics. And this culture, which is called the Ashkar, they're the only ones that can still perform magic. But it's like they create small tokens and trinkets, and they can have minor magical powers. So, for example, the physician character uses these trinkets to heal people. And the main character has been given one of these Ashkar trinkets. And what it does is it allows them to basically projects an illusion that makes people think they are the prince. And that helps the whole body double thing happen. So this is a pretty cool idea where in fact, they even make it very clear that the magic doesn't actually physically change the person at all. They even seem to go out of their way to alter the sword catcher to look more and more like the prince, so that it helps this illusion work better. And they even have a limitation to the illusion, which says people who know the sword catcher won't be fooled. But anyone who doesn't know the sword catcher, they'll be fooled into believing that he is the prince when he's wearing this necklace. So right there, I like the fact that there's some of these limitations on the magic and even the magical ability that the sword catcher uses. Except I see a problem here, and as I'm reading this first half of the book, I kept flipping back to the prologue, the chapter 0, and trying to understand, why is this still a secret? Because they act like in the book that no one outside of the royal family and the chief of the guard are aware that the sword catcher exists, that he is there to step in for the prince. The book completely seems to believe that no one has a clue that the sword catcher exists. And yet that limitation, and like I said, as I'm reading this book, I keep going back to this first chapter and rereading it, because as the sword catcher started as a 10-year-old boy, and now at the main point of the story, both the sword catcher and the prince are both in their 20s. I think they're 22 or 23. And in order to disguise that this boy is always around, the prince, they've concocted a story that he is a orphaned cousin of the prince. So he's kind of nobly born, but he's not from this nation, and therefore he's not really owed anything. But since he's family, and of the same age, he gets to hang out with the prince all the time. And so all the prince and his friends and the other noble kids are all kind of a friend group, including the sword catcher. And this is where I've just been struggling with this book. Is they said in the prologue, chapter 0, that the sword catcher, or that the people who know the sword catcher will see right through the illusion. So where I'm struggling is, how is the sword catcher thing a secret? I mean, you'd think, has the nobility had never shown up for one of these events where the sword catcher steps in? Because all the other kids and some of their parents know, or are friends with the sword catcher, at least at some level. So now we're starting to define what it means to know someone. And I think that's how this book is, the magic of this has to work, is none of these people really know the sword catcher because he's using an alias. He's using a different last name so it sounds richer. And since he's playing a part, he's not, maybe you can say, well, they don't really know him because he isn't real. He's playing a character. And so, is that what it is? Like, is it the name, or is it like the fact that he's acting most of the time? Or is it a typo in the very first chapter that the limitation that anyone who knows the sword catcher will see right through the illusion? So, or is it that everyone, all the nobility, are well aware that the sword catcher exists, but no one talks about it? And I don't know. I'm just, oh, I am struggling here with this book, and I'm sorry. It has such good stuff. Like, the world building is so on point. The rag picker king. Now this guy, he's like the kingpin of crime, and I love this. Like, it's almost like he's like the king, like, approved head of crime, and he's there to basically make sure crime doesn't get too crazy. You know, it's kind of like in Marvel Comics, the Kingpin. You know, the reason why in a lot of the stories the Kingpin is largely tolerated, at least at some level, is because, you know, he keeps the worst parts of crime at a minimum. You know, there's not as many mass shootouts and that kind of stuff, at least in the areas where he controls crime. And the Rag Picker King, as this king of crime in the city, he's kind of officially known to exist, and everyone, in fact, they even know where he lives. He lives in a giant, like, it's called the Black Mansion, that everyone knows that's his house. And yet they've never stopped him because, for reasons, whatever that reason is. And the only thing, what comes to mind to me is that he's kind of being the approved, you know, criminal that's basically making sure the crime doesn't get too crazy. And so the king has basically anointed him and said, okay, you have the charter on crime. All these other guys have charters for silk trade and horse trading. And you get the charter for crime. We're just not going to tell anyone about it. So what I love about this guy also is that at first they said that this position had existed for hundreds of years, like older than anyone knew, like possibly going all the way back to the Empire. So there's always been this Rag Picker King, and some people think he's been there the whole time, and so, but in my head, I was initially thinking, oh, this is going to be like the Dread Pirate Roberts type of thing, where, you know, every so many years, the last guy retires, he promotes an underling to become the new Dread Pirate Roberts and continues on the legend. And I was kind of thinking, oh, maybe it's going to be his childhood, the sword catcher's childhood friend from the orphanage, and he's the new Rag Picker King. And then we meet the Rag Picker King, and it's not. And that's fine. Not everything has to be a coincidence. But something odd gets said, and they describe him as appears to be about 30. And then the other point of view character meets him, and she also describes him as appears to be in his 30s. And suddenly, ding, you know, it makes me think, maybe not all the magic's gone, because when in fantasy novels, if you say someone appears to be in their 30s, yeah, it's probably because they're really, really old. Like, they're an undead, they're a vampire, or they're an elf, or in Wheel of Time, the Aes Sedai, you know, because they're long-lived. They kind of get this ageless quality where no one can really discern how old they really are. And so that makes me think, well, maybe there is some magic left in this world. And the Rag Picker King is important to that. So we've only barely gotten introduced to him, so I'm not sure where this is going, but, you know, he's going to be one of the main kind of characters in this story. It's hard to say whether or not he's a villain or a help, but he's definitely playing a key role here, and I'm excited to see where this goes. All right. So, and then also, there's also another character that is an interesting trope for me, which is the king has an advisor. Now, keep in mind, the king is kind of off on his own. Like, he's doing astronomy. And But when you listen to it, it sounds more like he's doing astrology. He's looking to the stars and trying to predict the future or something. So he has this foreign advisor that's helping him do this important astronomy work. But something about this feels really a lot more like this is a worm tongue type of story where this guy is like screwing with the king, and that's why the king has been so distant from his people and the administration of his kingdom. And so I'm really curious where this worm tongue character is going. So I already mentioned that the Ashkar are the only ones in the world that still have magic. Well, one of the things is when magic went away, they were the only ones that still had it. So one of the things I'm curious about that hasn't quite been answered yet is the fact that the Ashkar are the only ones with magic, is that what makes them Ashkar? Or were they just the only people that still had magic because it was these lesser magics that's some people in the general population were able to do? Is it that all those people were basically pushed together and they became their own community of, functionally just these physicians and alchemist type positions? Or were they already a distinct race or ethnic group that has become even more separated due to the fact that they were the only people with magic left? And so I'm kind of curious where this is going. So I'm glad to just kind of chat with you a little bit and just try to get these ideas out of my head, because as I'm reading this book, it has all the things I like and want in a fantasy novel. It has a complex world, and that has a very lived in, diverse nations and complex political systems and treaties and ambassadors, and it's a very complex world, and I really enjoy that part of the story. But there's these weird parts that cause me to kind of keep flipping back and be like, what was that again? Which house was that again? There was something about that country. No. And the magic with the sword catcher, like, how does that work again? So I feel myself jumping around, and that's not something I really often like to do in books like this. I kind of wish that there was either a map of the world so that I could get an idea of, like, at least relative, what the layout of the region is like, and maybe some arrows pointing off and saying, hey, the Shenzhen are off that direction, or through that, across that sea, or something like that. And so I wish I had that, or maybe just like a simple appendix or glossary where it says Marikand, known for blah blah blah, Shenzhen, known for silk, Hind, known for spices. I wish it kind of had that kind of thing, so I'd have an easier time. And it doesn't have to be anything like spoilery. This is just background detail, and this is kind of just a personal preference thing, honestly. But I find myself often jumping back and backwards in the book as I've been reading it to try to better understand the story, and that's where I'm kind of having a bit of a struggle, at least in the first half of this book. Hopefully in the second half, the action definitely seems like it's picking up right now. You can definitely tell that there's some like foreign plots and rival crime lord plots that are occurring, and the nobles working against each other. And so all of that seems to be coming to a head as the main storyline is accelerating. So I'm hoping that as those things pick up, I'll feel less inclined to jump backwards and try to get the answers that I'm looking for, or try to remember details from earlier as the story goes further and faster as the plot advances. So if I had to describe this book to someone and just kind of give a broad idea of what kind of book this is, I think I'd really just pick Game of Thrones. I mean, it really has that kind of lived-in, deep world that I like in fantasy novels. Doesn't have as much, at least readily accessible magic. And mostly it's a politics and talking a lot type of story. This also has kind of a shared world type of vibe because the world is so broad and vibrant with all these different cultures and nations and languages that it feels a lot more like a shared world, like you would get in something like a Dungeons and Dragons setting, or a shared setting like the comic book worlds, because it does feel so big. Even though the story is taking place within a single city, it feels like a big world with a lot of action going on. And I think that's my favorite part with the book so far. I'm excited to see where this goes. So I'm not sure where you're at, Lana, and how far you've made it in the book so far, but I hope this kind of gives you an idea of how I've been feeling about the book so far. So I've been checking out the Discord. There's been some interesting conversation, especially about some of these extras that apparently you got in your book and I didn't get in mine. Like, you have the fancy gold cover and like portraits inside your book, and mine doesn't have any of that stuff. So there's definitely different editions of this book. Maybe we can talk about that next week. So I'm looking forward to talking to you next week about how we both feel about this book as a whole. So when I talk to you next week, I'll try to come up with something interesting to say about, like and subscribe, or it gets the hose again, or something like that, and I'll think of something between now and then. So, all right, I'll see you in a week, and we'll talk about this some more. All right, bye.